Well, hey, welcome back to Brunch with Brooke and Brain. Woo! Today's going to be great, too. We are so excited to talk about this week's theme with y'all.
We've been working on this one for a while, and it has to do with our last episode, and it connects to our next episode.
Continuity. Isn't it beautiful? It's going to be really good. So for today, we're talking about engaged living.
Yeah, and if you listen to our last episode, engaged living is a really important part of happiness. In the PERMA model, it's the E. It is engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And one really cool study that we found is they did a study of 13,000 people, and the number one difference in life satisfaction was engaged living.
Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, I first learned about this in like my positive psychology class, and otherwise I wouldn't know about it. So I don't know, I think more people need to know about engaged living.
I would second that, Bren, honestly.
So our roadmap for today is, first we're going to talk about what engaged living is and why you should do it, and then we're going to talk about how to actually like live an engaged life. Like, what do you actually do to do that? And I'm going to take the first part, and Brooke's going to finish it off at the end. So if one of us is talking a lot more than the other, you know why.
Well, I mean, I like listening to you talk.
Oh, thank you.
It's for my own benefit, actually.
I feel like we flirt a lot on the show. I like you, but not that way.
She's just kind of amazing, and I gotta be honest. But yes.
Thank you.
I like you, but not like that.
Not that way.
Yeah.
We have husbands. We're married.
Yeah. And I love my husband. He's the best, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Woo.
Shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's go for
Okay.
it.
This is going to be great.
So first, what is engaged living? What does that even mean? Engaged living has a very simple definition, but then its actual applications can be very complex and can reach into like every aspect of your life. And so I kind of struggled as I made this episode because I was like, it's so simple, but it's so complex.
There's so much more to it than just a
Right.
sentence. Or yeah, it's tricky to wrap up.
Yeah, and like I said, I discovered engaged living in my positive psychology class, and as we were learning about it, I was like, this feels really important. I don't understand what it is or why it's important, but it feels important. And as I learned and studied about it more, it has become probably the most influential thing in my life. Like, it's just been so important to living the life that I want to live.
I love that. That's beautiful. Like, it resonated very deeply with you.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And you know that I talk about engaged living like fairly often, so
It's always inspiring though. I feel like I'm
sharing it.
constantly attending a TED Talk, and I'm like, yeah, wow, I gotta, yeah. You've definitely been a very wonderful example to me of engaged living.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, engaged living is living aligned with your values. That's it.
Wow. We're done.
But what that, let's take that apart like piece by piece. So living to me is like an action word. It's a verb. It takes initiative and you're moving forward with something. And then aligned to me is like you're walking hand in hand, like you're step in step with your values, and your values are the things that matter most to you in your life. If you're like, how do I know what my values are? I don't normally say what our next episode is going to be, but I am going to this time. Our next episode is on values and how to find them and purpose and meaning. So if you're wondering about that, wait till 2 weeks from now. A second kind of component of engaged living, which Brooke is going to focus on, is making towards moves. Moves towards your values. And so what this looks like is, say your values are on one side of the room, you always essentially have the choice to step towards or away from your values. No matter where you step, you're towards or away from them, or side to side, which means you're not going towards your values. Right? Like, examples of this in real life are, say one of the things you've decided you really value is your friends.
Yeah.
And what are towards moves you can take? You can say, I value my friends, and so I'm going to make sure I respond to their texts in a timely manner. I value my friends, so when they talk, I'm going to listen to them. I value my friends, and so I'm going to make sure I prioritize hanging out with them, right? And what are away moves? Not paying attention when they talk to you, or taking forever to respond to a text, or being rude, or like they're, you know, fill in the blank. There's always towards or away moves that you can make with anything. Education, for example, like if you really value learning, are you going to do your homework? Are you going to listen and come to class prepared? Or are you going to procrastinate? Are you going to get distracted in class? Every choice you make can really be a towards or away move from your values.
I love that distinction too of going towards something or away from it. And it kind of, in my mind, simplifies what you can do with that, and also the power of your choices. And even not choosing is choosing. Going back to the idea of, if you're not moving towards something, you're either going to be moving away from it or falling on the sidelines, which still isn't moving towards it.
Right.
So then you could become stagnant, or you're just not being intentional and living aligned to your values and what you're hoping to accomplish, your dreams, your goals, right? And that's a really easy separation in my mind of going towards something or away. I like that, Brun.
Yeah, and I also like the towards and away, because in reality, you're never going to arrive at your values. It's like last episode, we talked, one of the myths about happiness is the happily ever after myth. At one point, you're going to live all your values perfectly, but you're human. Like, that's not going to happen, but that's also okay because you're human.
Yeah, there's beauty in it, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about 5 reasons to practice engaged living. Number 1, you are always living someone's values, so why not live your own?
Whew. That's motivating. I feel like inner child of hating it when people tell me what to do. It's like, well, I am going to take charge. That's really well said.
Brooke's mom always says that she was a spitfire growing up.
Yeah.
So
little firecracker.
You're still very passionate, but you're fiery, but in like a way that I'm not afraid of getting burnt, I guess. Like, you're a firework instead of a bonfire.
I appreciate that. I've slightly mellowed out over the years.
Yeah, so you're always living someone's values, and it could be your family's values or society's values or the values of your friends. Say you live your family's values, which obviously there's an extent that, like, we have to fit into a society. We have to, like, work together and cooperate. So I'm not advocating for just, I'm only going to do what I want to do and, like, no compromises. No, I'm not advocating for that, but I am advocating for, like, standing up for yourself more and living what you believe. I think the world would be a better place if we lived what we really believed.
I agree, yeah. And also that it's okay to have different opinions or styles of doing things.
You can work together and have different opinions.
Yeah, we can be complementary and interdependent.
Yeah. Sometimes
it's in spite of our differences. Sometimes it's because of the differences. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good way to say it. So an example from my personal life, my family growing up really valued getting good grades because they wanted me to get into a good college. So not a bad thing to value that. But like my junior year, I was like, I really want to take these AP classes that are going to be really difficult and they're going to be a lot of time. But I really just love learning. One of my values is learning. And so I want to take these AP classes, even though I think I'll still get good grades, but maybe I'm not going to get straight A's. And maybe that's okay because I'll learn more. And so I ended up taking a bunch of AP classes and loved it. And that was fulfilling my value of learning, but stepping away from my family's values of getting perfect grades.
Which is so cool.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was like me starting a pattern for my life of doing the harder thing that's going to have me learn more rather than the easier thing that's I'm not going to learn as much doing. So, which I really value.
That's beautiful too. Way to go, Fred.
Okay, another value system we can follow is society's values. Society, once again, we have to like fit into a certain extent, but there's some things that maybe you decide you don't value. For example, our society, like we also talked about last time, really has a hustle culture, and we want to get a lot done, and you want to achieve and be prestigious, and it's more focused on like what you accomplish than what like you do. And
The
it's
becoming.
very fast paced, it's very busy.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe for you value the quiet, simple life. And that's a way that you step away from society's values and say, I just want to live in the mountains and have a dog and some chickens. And
That sounds really nice.
and so maybe you embrace that, right? But you could get dragged into like, I gotta have the hustle. Like, whose values are you gonna live? Society's or yours?
When you commented just on how here in, the US, there is very much a prevalent hustle culture, and it's just, you have value when you're productive, when you're doing stuff, when you're busy, when you're getting things done. And it's not inherently a bad thing to accomplish stuff or have a drive to complete things. However, a lot of times I kind of get a vibe that our worth is dependent on if we're productive. And that's not very healthy. Like, there is actually a lot of beauty and opportunity in slowing down and embracing the quietness or savoring life or practicing engaged living. Like, there's a lot of beauty to that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll need to go up in the mountains and hammock and just read a book or take a nap or just to slow down and be present, like to show up in my own life. And that's something I wish we did more of.
We're very future oriented. We always have to be working towards the future, but today is yesterday's future.
Yeah.
And so why not enjoy the future that we were preparing for, right?
So good. The precious present.
Love that.
There's some quote somewhere that's like, it's a gift. That's why it's called the present. I'm like, okay, good for you.
Say that in Kung Fu Panda.
That does sound
the
like
turtle.
Oogway is a genius.
He is. The last one I want to talk about is following the cool kids from high school's values. I mean, obviously this is something you can get sucked into in high school, but sometimes I still find myself being like, what would that like one random girl that I never talked to in high school think about this decision I'm making, or this thing I'm posting on Instagram, or like the clothes that I'm wearing, you know? And it's like, why do I still think about them so much? Why don't I do like what matters to me and what I value?
Yeah.
And how, I don't know, do you ever think that?
Yeah, maybe back in high school or college, there's one person who seemed like they had all of their crap together.
Yeah.
And then it's, oh, here I am, in my mid-20s and I'm doing this stuff. Am I measuring up? What is this person doing? Because they seem like they had it all figured out. I definitely feel like I've had moments.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're always living someone's values, so live your own values. I think one thing to ask yourself is, whose values am I living? And say, whose values do you want to live? What parts of society's values do you like? What parts of your friends' values do you like? How can you integrate those and be unique? I also think that so many people figure out their values on their deathbed. Don't figure it out on your deathbed. Figure it out now. For real, like in the last like 5-10 years of someone's life, how often do you hear like, oh, I wish I had done this, or like
the regrets.
I wish I had spent more time with this person. And I think we can prevent that by figuring out our values now, what we care about. Ooh. So that we don't have to, as we're dying, be like, I wish I lived my own values more.
Like, dang it. Yeah. Can I share a story that came to mind? So this past week I went camping, right? And it was really, really fun. I loved it. I needed it. It was so good just to be outside. And my phone was turned off and then dead for the majority of the trip. And it was nice because I could just be in the moment and practice engaged living. And like, it felt good in my brain and my body. And also for the relationships of the people I was with. And the very last day after my husband and I had packed everything up, we had like 3 Oreos left. And I love being in the water. I grew up in the water. It's just very calming, fun for me. And I wanted to go dip my feet into the lake and eat the last of the Oreos with my husband. Because that sounded really fun and meaningful. Brooke gets excited about that stuff because I'm in the water and then I'm enjoying the last view of the lake. I probably won't be there for a while. And I'm sharing a moment and connecting with my husband, which connection is a really big value of mine. And also, I really love and value nature and being present. And I just wanted to savor that. And I walk on over to where my husband is in the car, and he's turned on the car already, and we have all of our stuff packed away. And I wanted to drive, so I got into the driver's seat, and I was like, the car is on. Our stuff is packed. My husband's already buckled his seatbelt. I didn't communicate to him that this was really what I wanted to do, and I was excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been thinking about it for maybe an hour. And I talked myself out of it because I'm like, look at all these things that are already here. We'd have to turn off the car, which not that big of a deal. Like, it's so easy just to flip the key and turn it off, and then you can get back in. But I talked myself out of doing that thing that I was really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just felt kind of like, afterwards. And I was kind of down for a little bit. And then I told my husband, I was like, Sammy, I really wanted to do this thing, and I didn't communicate it. And I kind of have a regret now that I didn't do that. Like, I really missed the water, and I loved being where we were at. I wanted to have this goodbye moment. And he's like, baby, that's rough. I wish you would have told me. And
it's always sad when they're like, I would have been fine with
that.
Yeah.
Like, he was totally in support. And I wasn't true to myself, my values, or my goals in that moment. And that disconnect sat with me, and I didn't like it.
That's a good story. That's like very illustrative of like a small thing that is living in your values and that means a lot to you. And those small choices lead to a very full life, right?
Yeah. So I just ate the Oreos in the car as we drove.
And cried. I could be doing this in the lake.
My feet in the water. Yeah. Adapt.
That's funny. Okay. Number 2 is engaged living allows you to make better big decisions. How are you supposed to know what decisions to make if you don't know what your values are?
It's good.
There's so many big decisions to make, right? And so often people don't know their values, and I think then they make choices that later, when they kind of figure out what they value more, they're like, I really should have done this thing instead. Yeah. So I think it can save you a lot of heartache and a lot of backstepping because you know your values and you're moving forward with them always. Which leads us to number 3. Engaged living allows you to be intentional with every aspect of your life. You could think of this as like, it allows you to make the small decisions. Because why just be intentional with the big decisions? Because the small decisions are what make the big decisions, right?
Absolutely.
I often call engaged living intentional living because, I don't know, that just like makes more sense to me, because it's being intentional with every action is really what engaged living is, right? And I hear the word intentional a lot. People are like, yeah, I want to be more intentional with this. They had this intention. We use that word a lot. Sometimes I wonder, like, how much do we really, like, understand how intentional we really can be?
Like the impact it can make.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So some examples of being intentional with every aspect of your life. One is if you have a challenging opportunity, a new job, you can go start a business. For me, it was this podcast. This is something that's going to be challenging, and it's going to take a lot of time, and it's putting myself out there in a way that I haven't done before and can be kind of uncomfortable. It's very vulnerable, but I can look at my values and say, what are some of my values? One of them is growth. One of them is learning, and one of them is goodness. And through this podcast, I can grow. I can learn because I study a lot for each of these episodes. And then I can share what I think is goodness. It fulfills so many of my values. So it's like, of course, this is something that I should do, right? And it's been great.
I love that, though, like breaking it down in terms of what are my values, and then how can I live aligned to those values, which is how can I live intentionally, right?
Yeah.
And even with something that has been challenging, and there have been some scary, vulnerable moments, like I for sure have felt that as well, of this is new, and we're putting ourselves out there, and that requires a lot of bravery, confidence, and resources, and we are still getting started with it all, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're still trying to share it with people, and we're officially on social media now, and that's been really fun to share. It's like, we're out there, we're doing it. And tomorrow we'll release our first podcast episode, and that is like a very big milestone.
Yeah, big jump.
And there are a lot of learning curves in life, and also when we pursue things that are challenging. And when they're meaningful and when we're intentional about our values, it can help us move forward and be okay with kind of the ups and the downs and all of the craziness or the worries or insecurities that come up. It's like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm living aligned to my values.
It allows you to commit to difficult things because it's, you know, that you value those difficult things.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about more later.
Another
way that's kind of a small way to live intentionally is, for me, one of my values is family. But that also extends to close friends, because I want my close friends to be like family to me. There's some people that value having beautiful. There's some people that value having lots of friends. I call them like close acquaintances. Like you kind of know them, but not like super know them. But you just like having lots of friends. If that's what you value, I think that's awesome. But I've always had a little bit of a harder time like opening up around people, and I really just love that security of having really close friends.
Yeah.
And so a decision me and my husband have made is to have 3 close friends, 3 close couple friends. Brooke is one of them.
It makes me so happy.
We decided to do this about 2 years ago, and we'll still do stuff with other people. It's not like we can only see these people, right? But we really focus on those 3 people, and so making sure we're spending time with them often, and we reach out to them, and we treat them like family. Like if they're having a hard time, we try and be there for them in a way that you wouldn't for just kind of a casual friend. And as we've chosen the past 2 years to focus on having those close friends, it's been incredible because those people really feel like family to us. And some of our close friends, they invite us to stuff that they only invite their family to. It'll be like all of their family and us. And that's just very cool to like see how much they love and appreciate us and how close we are to them, and how us prioritizing them has led to these connections that are going to last our whole lives, hopefully, and be really strong and meaningful in a way that smaller friendships couldn't. And so that's one way that I've lived intentionally. I've said, what friendships matter to me, what people matter most to me in my life, and how can I really focus on being as close to them as possible.
Which is really amazing. And I remember the first time you shared that with me, and I can't remember when. It was a few years ago, but you had said, Brooke, Logan and I have talked about this, and here's our thing, and we have decided to focus on people who feel like family. We want to keep pursuing those relationships and also building it so that we are, you know, constantly in each other's lives, and it's meaningful, and we're showing up for each other. And I remember just feeling so touched and also inspired by y'all. And I remember going back to my husband and saying, hey, can we talk about this? And it was really cool to have a conversation and just kind of slow down, because sometimes I can be that person who's like, yeah, I enjoy having a variety of friends. And that being said, I do crave that deep, close connection and just the, oh, you get me and I get you and I see you and I love this person for who they are, and they care for me even with all of my quirks, my falling, my shortcomings.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to like look at the alternative to that. Like, what if we didn't choose to focus on that? We could have probably more friends, but we wouldn't be as close. We might not be doing this podcast.
Yeah, it's true. Then you all would miss out. So
I made a good decision.
It's all because of bread.
And we might have lots of close acquaintances, but those people can easily move in and out of your life. I'm like, for Brooke, like, if you moved across the country, I would be like,
I'd be devastated.
Like, you can't move, Brooke. I would like visit you and we would call regularly, right? And that's not something that if I hadn't chosen to prioritize you, that's a relationship that easily could have been lost, right?
Yeah.
The third example I have is religion. Not everyone's religious, obviously, but if you are religious, I think a lot of people can kind of be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And this can really go for anything. Not religion, any belief system or political beliefs to an extent or groups you're a part of. The thing that makes most sense to me is religion, since I'm religious. So saying, what do I believe? Like, do I really believe what my religion says? And if you do, then fully living it. Like, are you... For me, it's like praying every day and like reading my scriptures and stuff like that. Fully committing to living those things, being all into it, rather than I'm gonna like kind of do this. Like if I believe
half-hearted.
If I believe this is true, then I should do it, right? And I think whatever that is for you in your life, whatever belief system you have, if you believe that meditation is really gonna help you and be good for you, do it every day, right? Like, or every other day or weekly, whatever like is best for you. Like whatever belief system, or if that's like practicing gratitude for you, like what you believe in, like really doing those things. And if you decide you don't really believe in those things, find what you really do believe in, right?
Yeah. Live in your truth.
Yeah. Find your truth and fully commit to living it. Because otherwise, I think you're going to have a lot of regrets, because you're like, I really believed in this and I didn't really act on that.
Yeah.
And that leaves, it takes away peace of mind. And that's what engaged living is really about, is getting peace of mind. Because you have your values and you live them. So you have peace of mind, which we talked about in the last episode as being a better thing to chase than happiness.
Yeah. Completeness and peace of mind.
Yeah. Something to remember with this is it's really easy to get into perfectionistic attitudes where it's like, you know that you can live intentionally in all aspects of your life, so you feel a lot of pressure to do that. But like we said before, you're human. Like, you can't be perfect. It's just not healthy to be like, I have to be perfect at living engaged all the time.
That's just a lot of pressure.
Right.
Yeah. And it's good to be intentional, right? And it's also so vitally important to have a big heart for yourself.
Yeah.
Like that's huge, being able to give yourself grace, because not everybody is going to give you grace. And life isn't going to say, oh, you're having a rough time, I'm going to give you a beautiful day with anything you could imagine or ever want happening in that 24-hour time frame. You can always hold compassionate space for yourself. That's a really important life skill. And good with engaged living too.
And you can be intentional about that. Be intentional about the fact that you want to hold that space and be compassionate to yourself. Right. Okay, this next one is one of my favorites. This is number 4. Engaged living turns dreamers into doers. I know so many people that have these really beautiful dreams. They want to do so many things with their life. But then I look at their actual actions, and they're not doing things to achieve those dreams. And I don't know, I just can't imagine like the regrets at the end of your life when you're like, think of everything I could have done if I had been intentional in more aspects of my life. And that's the beautiful thing about engaged living, is you can say, what do I believe in, and how, and what are my values, and how can I move forward with those, and what goals should I have, what dreams should I have that align with those values, so that I can create this beautiful, full life. And it allows you to chase bigger goals because you have direction. And it allows you to say, these are my values. How can I have a life that most reflects those values? So it allows you to dream like 30 years in the future or whatever it may be, and say, what does a life that most aligns with my values look like in 30 years, and how can I make choices to get there?
Which definitely touches on the importance of dreaming and having things that we're excited about, we look forward to. And also, there is definitely an important piece of, there is a difference between just dreaming about it and doing. And action is such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And through our choices, our behaviors, we can grow. Or there's the alternative of, we're not growing, we're kind of more stagnant. Maybe we're super unhappy or stuck or different things there. There is a really important bridge that we can build between being a dreamer and a doer. Like, you can have both, and that is really good.
Yeah. And that leads nicely into number 5, which is engaged living allows you to adapt to life rather than being swallowed up by it. Because as we have these goals and we have these plans for the future, life changes. Like we always talk about, it's the human journey. You're going to have things come up. There's goals you aren't going to be able to achieve. But the thing is, engaged living is value-based, not goal-based. So even if your goals get messed up or you have a big roadblock that makes it so you can't achieve that anymore, you can still live your values.
And also practice a growth mindset with that.
Yeah, a growth mindset. Yeah. So an example of this is, say one of the things you really value is learning. So as a teenager, you're like, okay, I'm going to do well in high school so I can get into a college, so I can get an education, because that's something that you value and that's the avenue you've taken to pursue your learning. But you're about to go to your freshman year of college, you're so excited, and your mom gets really sick. And it turns out you can't go and achieve that goal anymore. So then you can say, I still have this value. How can I pursue that value even though I can't achieve that goal? So maybe instead of going to traditional college, you do online college. Or you say, I am going to work while I'm taking care of my mom so that when she gets better or passes away or whatever it may be, that you can go to college. You'll have the money and the resources to do that. Or maybe you say, I don't think college is going to work out for me for a while, and so I'm just going to read a lot, and I'm going to buy textbooks even, or online courses. Like, do as much learning as you can, because learning is something you value. And it's just so beautiful how you, even as your life circumstances change and your goals and dreams have to change, you can always live your values still.
Yeah, the piece that stood out to me as you were sharing all of that, there are different avenues to accomplish our values.
Yes.
Like, if you have a value of learning, which we both share very deeply, and we're very passionate about that. If you also value learning, there are so many ways you can learn. Like, you can go to a trade school, or if you don't want to do kind of the traditional college stuff, what job or opportunities can you pursue that will help you learn and develop skills and do something that you get excited about, right? And also, even when our circumstances change, even when stuff comes up and we need to adjust, we always have the opportunity and ability to choose how we want to honor our values and live aligned to them. Yeah.
I love that we have that choice to adapt. So another way to say this is that engaged living allows you to be flexible yet strong. Flexible to adapt to life's circumstances, but strong in sticking to your values. One thing you can ask yourself is, when roadblocks do come up, how can I live my values even though I can't accomplish that goal anymore?
I love that.
So those are the 5 reasons that you should pursue engaged living, and why I at least think it's great. So now we're going to talk about engaged living skills. And there's a few of these. If you want to learn more about engaged living, our positive psychology professor actually has a website that talks about a bunch of positive psychology stuff. It's called My Best Self 101.
It's so good.
And they have a whole unit on engaged living that in this episode, we're focusing more on what it looks like in daily life and less on like the engaged living skills, I would say. So if you want to learn more about those, you can go check out that website. I'll link it in the show notes.
It's nice too, because with the modules, you can actually go in and you can learn more about research studies and also helpful advice on how to pursue different values or the subject, right? Because there's more than just engaged living. It's just an amazing positive psychology website. And you can do like a pre-test and a post-test after you've gone through the model of, hey, how was my engaged living increased or changed since I started? Like, it's really good. It's a really cool website. I highly recommend.
Yeah, they have a lot of really cool content on there, and it's all like well researched and backed up by science and everything. So it's a good one. So the 2 engaged living skills we're going to focus on are vulnerability and courage.
Woo! I'd imagine that some people, when y'all heard vulnerability, was like, oh, no, stop.
Not vulnerability. The probably like most prominent person that's done research on Vulnerability is Brene Brown. I have not read any of her books. I probably will at some point. Haven't gone around to it yet. But if you're interested in vulnerability, that's probably a good place to start. And she has a great TED Talk that I will also link on vulnerability. So, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is opening yourself up to risk and uncertainty in order to live life more fully or live in your values more. This is important for engaged living because if you have your values, they are inherently risky. Really, any action you take has risk, but the more engaged you live, the more risk you have to an extent. And so I'm going to go through a few different, I'm going to say a risk and the reward that comes from it, and hopefully you'll kind of see why being vulnerable, taking those risks, is important to living a full life.
I'm excited.
Okay, I have 5 of them. The first one is the risk is letting others into your life even though they could hurt you. Any relationship you have, you could hurt me a lot, Brooke. Thanks for not doing that.
I try not to. Thank you for trusting me.
Friendship or like romantic relationship or being in a family, those all inherently, you're being vulnerable to people and they could hurt you, right? But that allows you to have more friendship with people and a greater connection and more relationships. Yeah. And that goes along with number 2, which is being open about the ugly parts of yourself and difficult things you have gone through. And the reward is allowing for deeper connection. Something that they talked a lot about in social psychology, the class that I took, is when you're vulnerable with someone, they tend to reflect that back and be vulnerable with you.
It's almost like giving permission.
Yeah, like if you share something, they'll share something with you usually, and that allows for a deeper connection. So, like, obviously, you should be able to feel out, like, oh, this is, like, an appropriate time to share this deeper thing, or it's not appropriate, or this person seems uncomfortable with this conversation I'm trying to have, so I should pull out of it. So,
pay attention to the cues.
Yeah.
To the verbal and the non-verbal body cues that you get from people.
For sure. Another one, number 3, is allowing yourself to feel all emotions. As Brene Brown says, if you numb yourself to pain and grief and sadness, you also numb yourself to joy and happiness and contentment and all of those things.
Absolutely.
You can't just numb one emotion. You have to numb all of them. And like we talk about, feeling everything is part of the human journey, and that's a way you can most fully experience your life, by allowing those emotions in and working with them instead of trying to push them away. Number 4, taking leaps of faith is a risk, and trying new things is a risk. Embracing uncertainty is a risk. But by doing that, the reward is you can accomplish your goals. Like we talked about, like this podcast, it's a risk, but like what rewards can we get from it? Or getting into a new relationship, that's a risk. Or trying anything new, it's all a risk.
Applying for a new job. Yeah.
But moving, there's rewards associated with all of those things, right?
Heck, even trying a new recipe.
Yeah.
In the kitchen, you're like, I don't think this is gonna work very well. Like, and if you do try something new and you absolutely hate it, and it's not something that brings you satisfaction or growth or, you know, whatever else, if you're just absolutely miserable trying something new, then you've learned something about yourself. You've learned that you don't like that thing, and you can use that information.
In itself, right?
Yeah. There's always a reward, I guess, is what we're trying to say.
And there are, like, times where you need to say, like, is this a time in my life that I can deal with this? You know, you don't have to take all the risks. I think for many of us, there's risks that we could take to have a more full life, but we're just scared. But, like, we could handle it, right? And we could deal with it.
And the whole thought of what if. I think I can hold myself back a lot by that what if piece.
Yeah.
But really, I don't know. I don't know how people are going to respond or what might happen if I pursue a course of action. And that's when it comes back to the importance of just acting. Like, instead of just dreaming about something and hoping for what could be, I can get to work. I can apply myself. I can do the pivots, right?
Yeah.
And I can become a doer, honoring my values and what I'm hoping for, and just my late grandma Joan would often say, hope for the best, plan for the worst, come what may, and love it. And I think that is phenomenal advice.
That is good advice. And this is her table.
Yeah, this is Joan's table.
Family heirloom.
Woohoo!
Number 5 is being honest with yourself. That's hard to do because as humans, we all have ugly parts of ourselves. We all have really dark parts of ourselves too, I think.
For sure.
And the more I'm honest with myself, the more darkness I see.
Mm.
But also, like, the more I can deal with those things and recognize that is a normal part of my life. And also recognize the light that I do have and just how human all of us are.
Yeah, which is a good place of acceptance.
Yeah.
And also just like, yeah, it's part of life.
Yeah, and it allows you to deal with your problems rather than always hiding from them. And it allows you to be your real self. And as you're honest with yourself, you can say, who am I really? Like, would the person I am wear these clothes? Right? Or like, what is on brand for who I really am? You know, like, I think it allows you to kind of be the most you.
Yeah,
when
more
you
authentic.
say, how should I authentically live my life?
Which is a really self-empowering place to be, because then it's like, okay, here are these things, here's my story, what can I do to move forward and be intentional?
Yeah.
And then we get to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And in our choosing is the growing and becoming, which can be very hopeful.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 5 examples of being vulnerable and the risk and reward that come with them. But as you become more vulnerable, you can more fully engage with life and live a more engaged life because you're being more authentic and uncovering your values more and living those values more.
And people notice a difference too.
Yeah, I think they do.
Like, I love being around people who are authentic to who they are. And it's refreshing, and it gives me permission to also show up more authentically as myself.
Yeah.
And I hope someday I get to a place where I'm just like, yeah, I'm me. I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to...
When you're old, why do so many old people have that figured out? They're just like, this is who I am.
Like, I'm just going to move forward, and I'm going to have a good time with it all. Yeah.
An important note on this that Brene Brown talks about is vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. Because vulnerability is not going out there and just letting yourself get attacked and trampled and putting yourself at so much risk. I mean, obviously in life there is pain, and so it's not like avoiding hurt, but it's avoiding too much hurt, I would say, or like unnecessary hurt.
Yeah.
So you have to evaluate the risk and the reward and figure out what boundaries you can set to keep yourself safe. To an extent.
That's big.
But also ask yourself, what boundaries do you have up that are actually holding you back? So, I don't know. It's a big, like, balancing act. But remember, it is okay to have the boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. Boundaries are healthy. They are important to have in your life.
And I have lots of people in my life that I'm really close to, but I know what my boundaries are for being vulnerable with them, because I know what things they will and will not respect or be nice about. So,
or what they'll say that can antagonize or aggravate. Yeah.
So the second engaged living skill is courage, and I got quite a bit of this from the My Best Self 101. I think it's really cool, actually. I think it's pretty interesting. The idea with courage is that, like we talked about, there's lots of risk in engaged living and being vulnerable. And so that takes courage to take those risks, right? But the action is more important than the outcome. It's more important that you live aligned to your values than you end up achieving a certain goal, right? There's this quote I'm going to read from Kyle Eschenroder, and they talk about the Greeks and Romans and part of their culture that focused on courage. So it says, in the era before gunpowder, all killing was of necessity done hand to hand. For a Greek or Roman warrior to slay his enemy, he had to get so close that there was an equal chance that the enemy's sword or spear would kill him. This produced an ideal of virtue, andria, in Greek. Andria means the judgment was based on actions taken, not outcomes. Society understood that the outcome was, at least in part, in the hands of the gods. What was in a man's control was how he acted. I love that because it's like, even if you live your values your whole life, you might not achieve the things that you set out to achieve, but it's less about if you kill the enemy and more about, did you have the courage to go out and be true to yourself and live your values and live the best life you knew how to, than what you ended up achieving. So it's about effort and living aligned rather than your outcomes. I think living within your values is a win in itself.
Absolutely.
And living your values gives you peace of mind and helps you to live without regrets. So have the courage to live your values.
I love that so much. And the last piece of what you shared with the quote was, what was in a man's control was how he acted. What is in our control? Going back to the pie chart we talked about from the How of Happiness. Well, a lot of times things just happen, right? Or kind of our genetic makeup, kind of the cards we've been dealt by life. And we can always choose how we respond. And there's a difference between reacting and responding, right? We can always choose how to respond. And we can always choose how we act, how we move forward, how we go towards our values. And that's, again, like, that's really empowering.
You do have control, and you can't control life, but you can always control your actions. So this is the part, this is part 2, how to practice engaged living. Because like we talked about with the way moves and the towards moves, we want to do towards moves, but there's actually like techniques behind that to do it. And Brooke is going to talk about that because she's training to be a therapist, and this is part of therapy.
It's been really interesting. Like when we were prepping for this all, in the back of my head, I just kept on thinking about this theory of change called acceptance and commitment therapy. My bad. And it's oftentimes just referred to as ACT, which is kind of fitting in the context of what we've been talking about, because we've differentiated the difference between just dreaming and doing, and how action is how we move towards our values, right? Like there is such an emphasis on our behavior, on our choices, and the action we take. And a lot of times it really comes down to that. How are we acting, right? How are we moving towards our goals and our values? So ACT is part of cognitive behavioral's wave that came in. It's the third wave that came about in therapy and psychology. And the whole goal is to enhance psychological flexibility through acceptance and mindfulness practices. So those are a lot of the skills and tools that you have in this, where it's about accepting what is, looking forward to what could be, and practicing mindfulness, like being able to slow down, be in the moment, to live engaged, to be intentional and determine how we want to move forward.
And I think that fits in really nicely with what we talked about, because we are accepting that we have life circumstances that are going to change, but we can still move forward in them and live our values.
Yeah. And especially with that, it goes into psychological flexibility, like our ability to adapt, to recognize, okay, my circumstances have changed. What is in my control? What can I do to be flexible, to adapt to what's happened and still move forward? I like that. So when things happen, when we go through hard stuff, when we experience stressors, ACT says that it's through practicing acceptance and mindfulness that we can have more healthy or adaptive responses. So some of the terms they often throw out to describe when we're getting stuck, it's called being hooked. That's a really big phrase in ACT. And also psychological smog. So some smoggy thoughts we can have is shoulds, no point trying, if only, painful past, scary future, reason giving, judgments, I know why.
Mm.
And then deep-seated fears. Like oftentimes we can get very stuck with these thoughts, as well as it can kind of create a smog of...
So are these ways that we get hooked?
Yes, ways
Okay.
that we get hooked. Yeah.
So it's like I have this deep fear about this thing, so I'm having a hard time moving past this or trying to do this thing,
Mm-hmm.
or I had a painful past,
Yeah.
and so it's hard for me to get out of like this trauma that I've had, or I
Mhm.
should be doing this, and so you get hooked on that should.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is a great application of
Mm.
all those things. Yeah. With engaged living, it's good to be able to recognize most of the time should is really harmful, and it can put a lot of pressure on us. And then also no point trying. Well, there is a point in trying. Like there can be purpose
Mm.
through it, and there is a point to honoring our values.
That
right?
goes back to vulnerability. You have
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
take
Risk
the
and
risk,
reward.
and you get the reward. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we never take a risk, we never know. And something my mom would often say growing up when I would be nervous about something, she was like, Brooke, what's the worst somebody can say? No. And it was really helpful that she challenged some of my things there, right? And there are different circumstances, right, that might not work as much. But for the most part, when we
Yeah.
are working and interacting with people, the worst thing they can say is no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So why not?
Yeah.
I love that question. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. Instead of why not? I love that.
Mm.
So there are 5 major steps to act, right? The first step is to identify your guiding values, which we'll talk a lot about in our next podcast episode. The second goal is to set a SMART goal. So goals that are realistic, they're measurable. You can determine, okay, if I do these actions, it'll help move me towards this goal, right? And then it's time realistic as well. The third step is to identify beliefs. The fourth step is to identify obstacles, like what could get in your way with this goal? What might deter you? And how can you move through it? And then the fifth step is to make a commitment. It's like a commitment to live aligned to your values, to practice engaged living, to be intentional and to show up in your life. And I think those 5 major steps are really helpful to think about with applying it. So another thing that I really love, and ACT, a lot of the times they say the antidote to fear is dare. And fear and dare are both acronyms that I want to dive into for a moment. And fear stands for fusion with a story. So fusion is kind of, it relates to getting hooked, to getting stuck. Fusion with a story is like, I am old. Like this story defines me.
You have like a narrative that you put with
Yeah.
it. That
Mm-hmm.
okay. Yeah.
And you're fused with it. Like it's,
Mm-hmm.
you're clinging to it. It's, I am just Brooke with type 1 diabetes. Like that's all there is to me. That's it. Like it can be very one dimensional. And then E is excessive goal. A is avoidance of discomfort, which it's okay to be uncomfortable. And it's important to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. There always needs to be safety, and there's no growth in the comfort zone.
Yeah.
So when we avoid discomfort, that can be kind of unhelpful for us. And then R is remoteness from your values. So kind of like distance from your values.
Yeah. The opposite of engaged living.
Yeah. Yeah. So fear is kind of like the problematic pieces that can challenge our engaged living, our attempts for it. Dare, though, there is definitely a skill that can help us with intentional living. So D stands for diffusion. So like, again, helping us with diffusion from a story. We're diffusing. We're like, okay, there are so many more pieces and parts to me, right? And then A is acceptance of discomfort. R is realistic goals. And realistic is a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the little steps? What are the big steps?
Yeah.
Short-term and long-term perspective. And then E is embracing values. And going back to what ACT says, that when we do embrace our values, it guides us forward. We can be more intentional. We'll have more peace of mind. Yeah. Any thoughts on those, Bren?
I like that. I like how easy it is to be like, I'm struggling with this right now. What story am I fusing with? What am I, for example, like this podcast, like if I'm like, I'm really nervous about making this podcast because I'm fusing with the story of like, I'm not good enough, or like, I've never done something like this before, things like that. And then I can look at Darren and be like, okay, like, who says that I can't do this? Or like, what skills do I have that would actually qualify me for this? Or like, and I can accept the discomfort that, yeah, this is going to be uncomfortable at times, but I need to embrace my values, and also let's make the goals realistic so that it's something that I can actually achieve. So I think that that's very helpful for getting over a lot of fear.
Hey. We dare, and that helps us with our fear.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a really good example for it all. So thank you. Okay. So here are some more of the skills and tools. So I'm going to list off a couple. We'll explain it. And then, Brent, I really want to hear your thoughts on this.
Let's hear it.
Is it doable? Is it not? Will it help with engaged living? Will it not? So a lot of acceptance and commitment therapies interventions that they'll use, like if you're seeing a therapist who uses ACT and you're like, hey, I want to use ACT for my therapy and everything, they'll be like, okay, well, here are the interventions. So there's the bullseye, which is kind of like a target practice. If any of you have ever done archery or you've seen a big target before, like throwing darts at. So the center is kind of your hope, your dream. Like that is your goal that you're working towards. And maybe it's your core values, right? They talk about that a lot. Like, what are your core values? And then on the outside, it's kind of like, yeah, things that matter to me, but they'll go out and maybe it's not as important. And a lot of times we can look at, okay, what is my bullseye in my relationships? What does my bullseye look like in my career? What does my bullseye look like with my physical activity? Like you can look at all of these different aspects of our lives and you can kind of create a bullseye and say, okay, what is my hope, my dream, my ideal for the center? And then how can I focus on that target? So that's something, because it will narrow down our focus and we can see, oh yeah, like this is more important to me than these other things, right?
I love that. I think it's very applicable to engaged living because, like we'll talk about next time, most of us have a lot of values, but like I've narrowed mine down to 6. Like I have 6 values that I focus on, right? So saying I have a lot that is important to me, but what is most important to me, I think is really important for living an engaged life, because there's only so much you can focus on, right? So focusing on what is most important is really important.
Like it'll shift through your priorities or sift through your priorities. Yeah. And it makes it easier to then focus on what actually matters most. Yeah, I like that. And then another one is the Triflex Psychological Flexibility Assessment Tool. Sounds very long, sounds very fancy. Basically, it's just going back to, how are you doing with your psychological flexibility? Like, can you offer yourself grace? Can you be mindful? Can you be flexible? Can you adapt as your circumstances change and things happen to you? There are 3 aspects of psychological flexibility. So I'm going to go through the 3 of them because I think they're pretty important just for understanding it better. So this is how we can help ourselves be more flexible, how we can help ourselves adapt and be more able to pursue engaged living. So the first one is being present. So contacting the present moment and self as context. So like me, when I'm outside, say I've had a really stressful day of school and my 2 jobs, and I'm just like, whew, I'm carrying a lot of things right now. My brain is going a million miles a minute. I'm going to take a couple breaths. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to be mindful, and I'm just going to engage in the present, and I'm going to check in with my body, with my emotions, with my senses. I'm going to be present, and that can help ground us. It can help slow things down. It can bring clarity, focus.
It helps you unhook from like all the difficult things that have happened.
Yeah. And it also helps diffuse.
Yeah. And you're not saying, okay, I'm just going to like distract myself by like looking at the trees or like being mindful of my body. You're saying, what am I feeling? What emotions do I have? Rather than trying to run away from them. You're accepting them.
Yeah. Like it's very much, instead of avoiding my problems and my stress or the sources of my stress, I am going to use what is around me to be present. Like, oh my goodness, I love how the light shines through those tree leaves. Like, random, but that is something that brings me a lot of joy. Like seeing the light illuminate a leaf sounds kind of silly, and it brings me joy. So it's okay. And being able to lean into the resources around us, both from the people in our lives who show up for us and are safe spaces, and also how we can take care of our mental health, our physical well-being, like all of these things, the skills that we have within ourselves, like even being able to just pay attention to our senses. Like in the past 24 hours, how have my 5 senses brought me happiness or showed me that I'm feeling anxiety or stress right now? And then like slowing down, being intentional, being present to understand ourselves better and recognize what we need in order to move forward.
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. So the second step of psychological flexibility is opening up, which talks a lot about diffusion and acceptance. So like opening up to other possibilities, to different options, different paths we can take, and also accepting what is happening, accepting our circumstances in a way. And the hope is that we'll be able to adapt better. And then the third and final piece of psychological flexibility is doing what matters. So ACT talks a lot about values and commitment-based action. That is pretty huge. And ultimately, it's just doing what matters to you, like finding what brings you purpose, figuring out what is most important to you. And I think that's really good, and that can help us be more flexible with ourselves, with our thoughts, with our behavior.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is super helpful, and as I personally have been learning more about ACT, I found for me a helpful way to sum it up is the first step is to know your values. The second step is to acknowledge what's going on, what I'm feeling, that mindfulness piece, so I can say, yeah, I'm like having a hard time doing this right now and I don't really feel like doing it. But then number 3 is acting in your values anyway. And so you can still, you're not saying, I'm just going to ignore that feeling. You're saying, because so many studies show that trying to push feelings away actually bring them more into your life. That's like really well documented. Which is funny because all the time I hear people being like, oh yeah, I just need to stop being angry. And they're just trying to push that anger away, and that's not how it works, right? So saying, I don't know, I've just found this really helpful for me, where I can say, I'm feeling frustrated with this person right now. Let me feel that frustration, and feeling it often kind of diffuses the feeling, and naming it, saying, I'm feeling frustration right now, and I'm feeling it because of these reasons. And that allows me to say, okay, I now know that I'm feeling this. How can I deal with this feeling? Like, what actions can I take? How can I live within my values to be able to move forward in a healthy way, rather than just feeling this under the surface but not doing anything helpful with it, right? Yeah. Feelings, like you say, are information. They're really good, helpful information.
And then the very last thing that I want to share about acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is a pretty big tool, and I kind of talked about it when I was going through the steps, as well as DARE and fear and all of that. So STOP is another acronym. I feel like ACT loves acronyms. But sometimes they're easier for me to remember. So anyway, STOP, right? STOP stands for slow your breathing, take note, open up, and pursue your values, which I feel like your example was an amazing representation of that. Where we're going to slow your breathing. Like when I was talking about being outside in nature and not necessarily using it as an avoidance thing, more so as a calming, soothing, diffusion thing. Slow your breathing. That can be really grounding. Take note of what's happening, your sensations, your feelings, right? Like, I am angry right now, or I'm frustrated. Then open up. Why is that? Like, be curious. There's a lot of curiosity with ACT. And I think that's a really good tool for engaged living. Like, be curious about yourself. Be curious about what your values are. Be curious about what things mean to you or the interactions you have with others. And in being curious, you can learn more about yourself and understand your values better and how you can practice intentional living. And then the last one, pursue your values. Like that wraps it up, of create the life that you love and stand in your truth and pursue kind of that core bullseye, right? Like the target that you're aiming for. Pursue your values. So those are just some thoughts. And then all in all, make sure to keep practicing self-compassion. That is huge. And I'll say it time and time again, have a big heart for yourself because you matter. You're a person whose story is still unfolding and you're learning and growing. You're figuring stuff out. We all are. We're all on this crazy, wild, beautiful, hard human journey. Let's be compassionate to others and to ourselves and take a moment to reflect on.
It's so important.
Yeah,
I really like ACT, and I think it fits so well into engaged living because it's easy to say, like, just live engaged, know your values, and then act within them. But how do you actually do that? Like, when it gets hard, or when you're tired, or you're struggling with someone, or you're just having a hard time saying no to yourself or yes to yourself, or whatever it may be. It's like, how do you actually do that? And ACT, that's what it talks about, how to actually take those steps towards your values when you're struggling to do that. Because there's times that it's easy to make those towards moves, and there's times that it's really hard.
Absolutely. And there will be days when we might not feel up to it, right? And it's okay. I think a really big thing is learning how to take rest.
Yeah.
Like, instead of quitting on yourself, on your values, on what's important to you, learn how to rest, right?
Yeah, it's really important. And I think we'll talk about that more next week.
How
to incorporate that into your values. So,
okay.
Shall we review what we talked about today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Also, if you want to learn more about acceptance and commitment therapy, the book The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris is a really great resource. And it's very application based. It says this is what it is and this is how to actually apply it. It's a good one. So.
Most of my notes and the things that I shared about ACT stems from a lot of Russ Harris's work.
Yeah,
he's
pretty one of the
stuff.
Pioneers in it for sure.
Yeah.
So, okay, we started by talking about what is engaged living. Engaged living is living aligned with your values, and you do that by making towards and away moves. We talked about the 5 reasons to practice engaged living. Number 1, so you can live your own values rather than someone else's. Number 2, make better big decisions. Number 3, make better small decisions, or in other words, live intentionally with every aspect of your life. Number 4, engaged living turns dreamers into doers.
Woohoo!
Number 5, engaged living allows you to be flexible yet strong. You can adapt to life circumstances while still sticking to your values. And then we talked about engaged living skills, 2 of them. Vulnerability, which is opening yourself up to risk so that you can get rewards from that. It's opening yourself up to others and to pain and things like that, so you can enjoy deeper connection and knowing yourself better. And that's a really important part of engaged living.
Yeah.
And then we talked about courage, where the action is more important than the outcome, and focusing on what you're doing, the choices you're making, rather than the outcomes, because it's better to live aligned with your values than to focus on what outcomes you're getting, because you can't control the outcomes, but you can control your actions.
Yeah.
Right?
And sometimes we can get stuck in, what will the outcomes be, when ultimately one of the most important decisions we can make is just to take a step forward.
Yeah, for sure.
So the final piece that we went over was how to practice engaged living, using a lot of the tools of acceptance and commitment therapy, which has a lot of mindfulness in it. Acceptance, being able to be fully present and practice psychological flexibility, right? So self-compassion, slowing down, and also being able to identify when we are getting caught in kind of the smoggy thoughts, right? Like the shoulds, there's no point in trying if only, and to really help unhook us and be able to intentionally recognize, okay, what are my guiding values? How can I guide myself forward? And then what are SMART goals? What are my beliefs? What are potential obstacles in my life or for this goal that I have? Like if I want to improve a relationship with somebody in my life, like a parent or a friend or a roommate or whoever it might be, coworker, what obstacles could be in the way of this? And then how can I make a commitment using my values, practicing psychological flexibility, mindfulness, acceptance, compassion to move forward and to act, right? Like how can I move towards my goals, my values, and be intentional with my life? And I love a lot of what ACT talks about and just being able to slow down. Yeah. And when we do start to fear or worry, we can dare, right? We can dare to live aligned to our values and to accept discomfort and recognize that we grow a lot through getting out of our comfort zone. Yeah. So hold space for that. Hold space for yourself and embrace your values along the journey. And who knows? Come what may and love it, right? And it's okay if you don't love it. And there will be a lot of growth and a lot of self-discovery. Yeah. Which is exciting.
I love that. Yeah. To me, engaged living just opens up so many possibilities in life. And I don't know, what better wish could I have for anyone than for them to live a life that is full for them and that they value.
Absolutely.
And even if you're in difficult circumstances or don't come from the best background, you can still make choices that are going to make your life so much better as you act within your values. It's just, engaged living is so powerful, not just for happiness, but also living a meaningful life. Yeah. A life that's really meaningful to you. So many of us try and get meaning and value just from our work or for our family, but it
external sources.
It allows you to get meaning from all aspects of your life, which is just so powerful.
Yeah. To so savor incredible. It. Like we're alive. We're doing this thing called life. And ultimately we do have that ability within us that regardless of our circumstances, we can still choose how we respond, how we act, and how we live aligned to our values. That's pretty hopeful, pretty empowering.
So empowering, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is the end of this episode. If you would like to support the show, we have a Patreon and we have bonus content on there. We put bonus content out for every episode. This episode, we wanted to kind of build off our last episode and what we talked about in this episode and talk about quotes we found about happiness that we felt were a little problematic, that like weren't a very healthy way to look at happiness. And some of them are from pretty famous people too. Yeah. So, and quotes you've probably heard before. So in our bonus content for this week, we talk about those quotes and ones that we like better that look at happiness more holistically. I thought it was pretty fun and
I loved it. It was awesome.
So, so if you're interested in joining our Patreon, you can find us there. And then if you aren't interested in supporting in that way, we also have a Venmo that if you just feel like podcasting costs money, if you want to help us out, then we also really appreciate that. It means a lot to us. And then if you want to contact us or follow along with us, we have email, we have Facebook and Instagram. We post lots of short clips on YouTube or longer videos. And so you can find us all of those places.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks with our episode on values, and I'm really excited for that one.
I'm so stoked. And we love what we're doing. We love this podcast. And we hope that it's helpful in some way and it provides a space for you. And yeah, it does take a lot of work for sure. A lot of time and effort goes into these episodes.
I am sleep deprived.
Let them have it. And so it does mean a lot when you do give us a follow, give us a like, and contribute with Patreon or Venmo. Like there's never any pressure, and it does mean a lot because this does take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah. And we really would love to hear from you if you have any feedback or things you loved or different perspectives.
Recommendations.
Yeah. things you want us to do an episode on, all of those things. We'd love to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So, thanks for listening today, and be back in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Take care.